So we are in the topic process costing. In the previous session, we had already introduced what is process costing. We looked at characteristic of process costing. We said maybe the first characteristic output in one process is input to the next process until the final or finished product is made. We also looked at another characteristic. The continuous nature of production process means that there will always be closing work in progress, which must be valued. The third characteristic was output is in the form of main product, joint products, or even by products. And we also see the fourth characteristics. As a result of the processes, there is often what we call normal loss or expected loss. So those were characteristics of process costing. And then we said when you are looking at process costing, it depends on which type of process account you've been asked to prepare. There are process accounts which are prepared, which do not have work in progress. We normally call them basic process accounts. So if you've been asked what is a basic process account, is a process account that does not have work in progress. And then we saw how to prepare the process account when there is no work in progress. So in today's session, we want to look at, and this is always the most common part in exams, we want to look at process accounts with work in progress. So in the last class, we looked at process accounts without work in progress, with no work in progress. But in today's session, we want to focus on process accounts with work in progress. Now, work in progress represents uncompleted production in each process. It represents the job that is not complete. This uncompleted production is carried forward to the next accounting period. So we've said in process costing, work in progress represents a job, a work, a duty that is not complete. So work in progress, what does it include? It includes direct materials, direct labor, and production overheads. Now, when we look at work in progress, you can be asked to prepare process accounts with work in progress. Always check in the exams questions, which work in progress do you have? Do you have only closing work in progress? For example, if you are in process one, you cannot have opening work in progress. Out of process one, you can only have closing work in progress, because in process one, it is the first process. So in a first process, there is no work in progress from the previous, because previous, if we are in period one, previous is period 0. So whenever you've been given questions on work in progress, confirm from the question, is there closing work in progress or is there opening work in progress? So what we are trying to say in this case, process accounts with work in progress can either be process accounts with only closing work in progress, or it can be process accounts with opening and closing work in progress. So always check, is there opening work in progress or is there no work in progress opening? So we'll be looking at process accounts with only closing work in progress. And then later on, after maybe some 20 or so minutes, we look at process accounts with opening and closing work in progress. So let's start with process accounts with only closing work in progress. Now, in process accounts with closing work in progress, we need to calculate the cost per unit. The cost per unit. So in order to calculate the cost per unit under questions with only closing work in progress, we need to calculate the cost per unit. But before you calculate the cost per unit, there is a statement which is called equivalent unit statement, which you need to prepare. So in process accounts with only closing work in progress, we need to prepare what is called equivalent unit statement. Equivalent units statement. And number 2, you need to calculate the cost per unit. Now, how do we calculate or how do we prepare equivalent unit statement? In equivalent unit statements under process accounts with only closing work in progress, that is, there is no opening work in progress, how do we calculate equivalent unit statement? You need to identify what are our output units. Output units, I'll show you through an example. Number two, you need to identify what are the closing work in progress units completed. Closing work in progress units completed. Number three, you need to ascertain whether there is abnormal gain or abnormal loss. Whether there is abnormal gain or abnormal loss. Now, when you take output units, that is number one, plus closing work in progress, plus abnormal loss, but if it is a gain, you less abnormal gain, what you get is total equivalent units. If it's a loss, you add it. If it's a gain, you less it. Number two, we need also to know how to calculate cost per unit. How do we calculate cost per unit when we have only closing work in progress? Cost per unit is equals to total cost of the asset, and then you identify total equivalent units. So when you take the total cost minus total equivalent units, what you get is cost per unit. How does a process account look like with only closing work in progress? So there will be an open space in the debit side, and this space, you don't post anything on it. And then, of course, materials added, labor and overheads, those are on the debit side. On the credit side, you show your normal loss, output, closing work in progress, and abnormal loss or gain. If it's a loss, it's on the credit side. If it is a gain, it's on the debit side. So that's basically how we prepare process accounts with only closing work in progress. We have an example that we want to go and do it also through Excel. So in this example, we are being told ABC Limited has the following information: direct materials, 8,000 units, costing $24,000. Conversion costs $18,000, and normal loss is 5%, and the scrap value is 2% per unit. Output is 5,000 units, and closing work in progress is 2,000 units completed as. 2,000 units completed as. What goes to direct materials and what goes to conversion costs? What goes to direct materials and what goes to conversion costs? So required in this question is to prepare the process account. So we also have another question. But in that other question, I'll only read it when the time appropriate. So the question here is asking you to prepare process accounts. You can see there is closing work in progress in the question. So in this case, in our solution, we are preparing process accounts with closing work in progress. Process accounts with closing work in progress. Process accounts with closing work in progress. So that is what we want to look at. Now, we said that whenever there is process accounts with closing work in progress, number one, you need to have what is called, number one, even if you have not been asked, you need to prepare what is called equivalent units statement. Equivalent units statement. Now, we had said in equivalent unit statement, you need to show, we said you show your output units. I'm just quoting what was in the slides. Output units, you need to show what is your closing work in progress completed units. Completed units. You need to show any abnormal loss stroke gain. If it's a gain, you need to identify, is it a gain or is it a loss? And then you need to also identify the total equivalent units. So those are the items whenever you are preparing process accounts. So you have that. You show your output units, you show your closing work in progress, you show your abnormal loss or gain, you show your total equivalent units. So maybe let me wrap these to make it more clear. Okay, I'm just making my work neat. Okay, so we have that. Okay, so that is what we have. Now, here you need to show what items are on the debit side. In the rows, you need to show what are your direct materials. Direct materials, are picked it from there. And what are your conversion costs? What are your conversion costs? Remember, conversion costs last time we said it's labor plus overheads. Labor plus overheads. So we have that as our equivalent units statement. We will look at the contents later on. So in order to prepare the equivalent unit statement, that is what you need. Number two, you need to calculate the cost per unit. Cost per unit statement or cost per unit statement. Now, in our cost per unit statements, we have said you have your total amount, and then you have your total equivalent units, and then you have your cost per unit, So that is what we have. Of course, I'll wrap it there. Again, you get what are your direct materials and what are your conversion. You come and paste it there. So we have that. That is cost per unit. And then finally, number 3, we need to prepare now process account. Process account. We need to prepare process accounts. I'm just preparing a T account, nothing much. Okay, so we need to prepare a process account. Okay, so these are process accounts. Let me increase this size a bit. Okay, so this is everything that we need. So let's just read the question now that we have the contents and we post the items. So we said, again repeating, in process accounts with closing work in progress, you need to, number 1, calculate the equivalent unit statement or prepare equivalent units statement. And we explained what the contents include. Number 2, you need to calculate the cost per unit. And we explained what the contents are. And number 3, you need to know how to calculate what? To prepare the process accounts. So let's read the question. ABC Limited has the following information. Direct materials are 8,000, costing 24,000. So we have direct materials. Direct materials are 8,000, costing 24,000. Now remember here we have particulars. Particulars. We have the units. We have price per unit. We have our price per unit, and we have our total amount. Or let me call it just amount. So that is what we have in our so I can also post it on this other side. Okay, so we have that. Can we now move on and post our items? So we have direct materials, as I have posted. Direct materials is 8,000. I've written it here. And the amount is 24,000. I've written the amount there. Conversion costs is 18,000. So next, conversion costs. Cost is 18,000. Sorry, I posted it in the wrong part. 18,000. It's an amount. Next, you're being told normal loss is 5% and the scrap value is 2. So normal loss is normally posted on the credit side. Normal loss is 5%. So is 5% of input, if you have not been told, of input is 8,000. So normal loss is 400. Is 5% of input. Input is 8,000. So 5% of 8,000 is 400. And the scrap price is 2. Scrap price is the price that is used to value the normal loss. The scrap price is 2. The price that is used to value the normal loss. So what will be the normal loss amount? Normal loss amount will be 400 times 2. 400 times 2 is 800. 400 times 2 is 800. Next, we have output is 5,000 units. Output is 5,000 units. Output is 5,000 units. And you can see here, we also have closing work in progress, 2,000 units. Closing work in progress. Closing work in progress is 2,000 units. Now, the remaining thing is percentage of completion. I'll show you how to account for them. So now, we said after that, the next step is to get the total. What is the total of the units on the debit side? It is 8,000. What is the total of units on the credit side? 400 plus 5,000 plus 2,000. Can somebody help me? Is it an abnormal loss or abnormal gain from the previous class, from the previous session? Do you have an abnormal loss? Just type AL to represent abnormal loss or AG to represent abnormal gain. Is it a loss or gain? Remember, we said a loss is posted on the credit side. A gain is posted on the debit side. Can you type for me the chat, please? It's an abnormal loss. Thank you, everyone. Ernest and somebody called S. Fred, thank you. It's an abnormal loss. Because it's an abnormal loss, we will write the higher amount. It is 8,000. So you have clearly told me it's an abnormal loss. So thank you for that. So it's an abnormal loss of how much? You take 8,000 minus 400 minus 5,000, you minus 2,000. It gives you an abnormal loss of 600. Here there was nothing. So 600. So let me close the debit side. What is the total of the debit side? The total of the debit side is 24,000 plus 18,000. So whatever value you get. So we can get the total. So now once you get that, you now go to the equivalent unit statement. You go to equivalent unit statement. Now, in equivalent unit statement, I still go back here. What is our output? Our output is, you can see our output is 5,000. And you are not given any percentages of output. There is no percent. You see, work in progress completed as. Work in progress has got percentages, but output does not have percentages. If there are no percentages, you assume the output is 100%. If no percentage, of course, it is always 100%. So here our output is 5,000. You come and just list it is equals to output of 5,000 times 100%. Output is always 100%. So again, 5,000 times 100%. So output, you put it as, you express it as 5,000 times 100%. I hope you are clear. Output is 5,000. You multiply by 100%. Now let's come to closing work in progress completed. Closing work in progress completed is given the percentages. So closing work in progress is 2,000 units completed as. Completed as. Direct materials is 80% complete. Conversion is 60% complete. So what we have here, 2,000 direct materials is 80% complete. Okay, conversion is 60% complete. So 2,000 times 60%. I'm just following instructions. Next, you are being told you look for abnormal loss or gain. We can conclude this time it's a loss. So I can remove that word gain. So what is our abnormal loss? Our abnormal loss is 600. So you pick your 600. We were not given the percentages. So if not given percentage, you assume it is 100%. If not given percentage, you assume it is 100%. If not given percentages, you assume it is 100%. Okay, we have that. Now, what is total equivalent units? Total equivalent units is 5,000 plus 1,600 plus 600. It gives you 7,200. And I repeat the same for conversion. 5,000 plus 1,200 plus that. The same total equivalent units is what you bring here. So what is our total equivalent units? 7,200. And this one is 6,800. Total amount, you pick it from the process accounts. What is the total amount for direct materials? You can see 24,000. So the total amount is 24,000 for direct materials, but we suffered a loss of 800. There was a normal loss of 800. So it reduces that because there was a loss in units of 400 at a price of 2 to give us a value of 800. So there was direct materials total amount is total amount of direct materials minus the normal loss, expected loss amount. Conversion cost did not have any normal loss. Normal loss was a percentage of materials and not conversion. So because it was a percentage, normal loss was a percentage of materials. That is why we remove this amount from that amount. But in conversion, you post it the way it is. Now, how do we get cost per unit? Cost per unit is the total amount you divide by total equivalent units. Total amount you divide by total equivalent units. Now, the examiner will always tell you how many decimal places to round to. So if you've been told round to 2 decimal places, it should be 2 decimal places. If it is 3 decimal places, 3 decimal places. In my case, I've decided to round to 4 decimal places. These are 4 decimal places. So always follow what the examiner has told you. If he has told you round to 2 decimal places, what do? You round to 2. That is 2 decimal places. If he has told you to 3 decimal places, you round to that. If he has told you 4, you round to 5 that. If he has told you 5, you round to that. But I've decided to round to 4 decimal places. 4 decimal places. 4 decimal places. Now, after you have done that, you need now to number 4, you need now to get the value of each of these items. So you can get the value of output, you can get number 5, value of closing work in progress, of course, completed. You can also get number 6, value of abnormal loss. So you need to get all these values. We'll start with value of output. Value of output, we get it, and then we go to value of closing work in progress, and then we get value of abnormal loss. Value of abnormal loss. So let's start with the value of output. We see how it is. So I'll come and post here. I'm just posting those direct materials and conversion. So I post those there. Now, value of output, of course, you will show what are the units of output and what is the cost per unit. Cost per unit. And then after you get cost per unit, it gives you the total amount. The total amount. Same, you just replicate that to these others. You just replicate that. Okay, so what is cost per unit? We all know cost per unit. We have calculated it up here. Cost per unit is 3.2 and 2.64. So we have that. We have already calculated the cost per unit. Let me just round to 4 decimal places. So it is 3, and the other one is that. So the last one also the same. Cost per unit, 3 and 2. So we have, in this case, units of output, you get them from equivalent unit statement. Equivalent unit statement. Units of output, what is the output in equivalent unit statement? 5,000 for materials and also 5,000 for conversion. Units of closing work in progress, you also get them from equivalent unit statement. Closing work in progress is 1,600 and 1,200. Units of abnormal loss. Units of abnormal loss is 600, and you also get 600. So how do we get total amounts? Total amounts is units times cost per unit. Units times cost per unit. Units times cost per unit. Okay, we have units times cost per unit. Units times cost per unit. So that is what we have. So what is the total amount? The total amount is that plus that. It gives you, the total amount is 29. Here the total amount is 5,000 plus 3,000. It gives you 83. And here the total amount is 19 plus 15. It gives you, so we have total amounts in each case. Okay. Now, what is our total amounts? We already have them. Total amount of output is 29,000. Total amount of closing work in progress is 8332. And total amount of abnormal loss is 3552. So finally, we see if we were right or not. If we were right, it will balance. If we were not, it will not. So what do we do in this case? We get the totals. What is our total? Has it balanced? Yes, 42,000. So in our process account, remember what we have said. In our process accounts with closing work in progress, we need, number one, to prepare equivalent units statement. You need to prepare equivalent units statement. What does equivalent unit statement involve? Number one, output units. Number two, closing work in progress units. Number three, abnormal loss or gain, and then the total equivalent units. Number two, you need to prepare the cost per unit statement. Cost per unit statement is given there. Cost per unit statement is given, total amount, total equivalent units, and cost per unit. And then now we go to process accounts. Process accounts, you also just do using the same. Maybe can we look at another example? Let's look at another example to make our work clearer. So another example from the notes again. Please take seriously this. The more examples we cover, the better for us. So C Limited is a manufacturer of processed goods, and the results of process 2 are as follows. Opening stock is 0 units. Materials from process 1 is 4,000 units, costing 6,000. Added materials is 1080. Conversion costs that output is transferred to the next process. Closing work in progress. So this question has not given you even normal loss. So we'll start by, again, in our solution, you will start by number one, equivalent unit statement. Equivalent units statement. Now, remember in our equivalent unit statement what we said. So what did we say in the equivalent unit statement? Remember these items. I'll copy to save time. Okay. I'll just copy to save us time. Okay. So we have that. But now on the debit side, we have materials. We have materials. We have added materials. Added materials is also there. I'm reading this. And we have conversion. Conversion costs. So that is what we have. So that is number one. Number two, we need to know how to calculate the cost per unit. Cost per unit. Cost per. There is also an important point I want to bring out here. Now, cost per unit, you'll need to know what is your total amount. Number two, you need to know what is total equivalent units. And then you will have your cost per unit. Of course, this remains the same. I'll copy that and try to paste it there. Okay. That is cost per unit statement. Number three, you'll need to prepare the process account. Process account. Again, because of time, let us just copy and paste the process account that was there. Of course, I'll remove all the values. I'll remove all the values. Please, let's be very attentive in this. Now here we did not have, we had added materials, and we have conversion costs. Conversion costs. We have conversion costs. And then we have number four, we have value of output. Value of output. Copy that and try and paste it there. Value of output. Number 5, value of closing work in progress. I'll also come and try to paste whatever I copied. Okay, so we have these. We can now be reading the question. Remember, under value of output, we said you show the units. You show the cost per unit. Cost per unit. And you show the total amount. Same here. So I have the template ready. The Excel sheet is visible. I think you are using your phone. That's why it's not clear. Okay, so let's continue. Now, I have that. So let's read the question once more. Now that we have the template. C Limited, a manufacturer of processed goods, and the results of process 2 are as follows. Opening stock is 0. Materials from process 1, Output in, remember this is process 2. So output in process 1 is input in process 2. So materials from process 1 is output from process 1, which is materials in process 2. So input in process 2 is 4,000 and the cost is 6,000. So here we have 4,000 and the cost is 6,000. Remember, this is not, it's called process 2 account. Process 2 account. Next, added materials is 1080. Added materials is 1080. Next, conversion cost is 1720. 1720 is the conversion cost. Conversion cost is 1720. Next, output transferred to the next process, and you have not been told it is how much. Next, you realize that output is transferred to the next process, and you have not been told it is how much. Next, closing work in progress is 800. Closing work in progress is 800. Now, in this question, there is no normal loss. So normal loss is 0 because it was not given. Price, of course, will be 0 and the total will be 0. So if you have not been given the normal loss amount, you assume it is 0. I'm repeating, if you have not been given the normal loss amount, you assume it is 0. Because there is no normal loss, there will also be no abnormal loss. I'm repeating. If there is no normal loss, there is also no abnormal loss. I hope I'm clear there. If there is no normal loss, if normal loss is not provided, note, I'll put it as a note so that you remember. Note, If normal loss is not provided, comma, there will be no abnormal loss or gain. I hope we will remember this. If there is no normal loss, actually that is the objective of this question. If there is no normal loss, there is no abnormal loss or abnormal gain. So this leads us to an interesting part. So if there is no normal loss, there is no abnormal loss or gain. Therefore, the total, you can see the total. The total is 4,000. This must also come to 4,000. So in this case, because the total is 4,000, the output is the balance. Output will be the balance now. Balance, because it was not given. Because there is no normal loss, there is no abnormal loss, so the difference is the output. So what is our output? 4,000 minus 800 is our output. I hope I'm clear there. If there is no normal loss, there is no abnormal loss or gain. If there is no normal loss, there is no abnormal loss or gain. I hope I'm clear there. Now let's go and find output units. Output, we said it is always 100%. So you take that times 100%. It will always be 100%. Output will always be 100%. Output is that. Closing work in progress is 800 units, but we were given closing work in progress. You are to 800 units here. 800 units completed as materials 100%, added materials 50%, and conversion 30%. So I'm repeating, materials 100%, closing work in progress completed, materials is the 800 times 100%. Added materials is 800 times 50%. And this other one, conversion, is 800 times 30%. Now, there was no abnormal loss because there is no normal loss. So if there is no normal loss, there is no abnormal loss. So it is 0. So what is our total equivalent units? 3,200 plus 800 plus 0. So it gives you 4,000 as your equivalent units. We come here. Our equivalent units is 4,000. 4,000. Okay, 4,000, 3,600, and 3,450. Total amounts, there was no normal loss amount. So because there is no normal loss amount, the total amount of direct materials is 6,000 minus, here is 0. We have minus 0. There is no normal loss amount, it is 0. Added materials, it is 1080. And conversion, it is 1720. Let's get cost per unit. 6,000 divided by 4,000. And I scroll. I can decide to do it in 3 or 4 decimal places. So if I do it in 4 decimal places, that is what we have. Because it is ending at that. So it's ending at that, it gives you those values. So next we need to find what is the value or what is the units of output from the equivalent unit statement. Units of output from equivalent unit statement is 3,200. 3,200, I scroll down. What is the cost per unit? We have already calculated cost per unit there. So our cost per unit is, I scroll down again. Our cost per unit is that what is the total amount? 3,200 times the cost per unit, 4,800. And then I can get the summation. So it gives us a total cost value of output of 73.60. That is for value of output. Next, we have value of closing work in progress. We go to the equivalent unit statement and pick closing work in progress. It is there. We go to the cost per unit statement and pick cost per unit. We pick cost per unit. It is again there. Okay. And then we can pick the total amount is units times cost per unit. Units times cost per unit. And that gives you, it gives you that value. So what is our total? Our total is 1440. Our total is 1440. So we come and now close the process accounts. What is our process accounts when we close? Our output, value of output is 73, and value of closing work in progress is 1440. Let's see if it balances. Remember, balancing figure is 8,800. So does it balance? We have this plus that. Does it balance? Yes. So that's how we prepare process accounts with only closing work in progress. How we prepare process accounts with only closing work in progress. So you know how to prepare process accounts with only closing work in progress. So if you've been given only closing work in progress, that is what you need to do. In our next session, we will look at, our next session is also today. We will look at, I just want to break this. In our next session, we look at when we have opening and closing work in progress. Remember, in this case, we only had closing work in progress. So what do we do when we have opening and closing work in progress? What do we do when we have opening and closing work in progress? That is in our next session.